How did you go from Israel to all of a sudden being in the biggest games in the world? There's a lot of steps in between, obviously, but please give the fans sort of the short version of that, because there's a lot of story involved in all those steps.
Well, I'll do it pretty short. Born up in Jerusalem, Israel, going to the army when I was 18 in 1978, serving and becoming an officer also in 1979 or 80. In 81, 82, the Lebanon war started, and I was an officer and I got wounded. And I remember, in my group, like the Green Beret over here, it's called the Golani Brigade. I remember one of the officers talking about Alaska. You can make a lot of money in Alaska. And my parents are average parents. My mom is a kindergarten teacher and my dad is a post office employee. And I remember the guy said, you can make so much money on the cannery in a fish, so in Alaska. So when I got wounded, I couldn't be anymore on my group. So I decided to take a leave for 6 months and check it out. I was with the cast. The cast got out of my leg for 3 months later. So 3 months, I flew to Alaska. And right there, learning English as a second language, you can tell until now I cannot lose my accent. So right there, I got introduced by the teacher that teach me English as a second language about a small Alaska Inupiaq village, which is Eskimo village in 30 miles above the Arctic Circle called Kotzebue. And I went over there after walking the cannery. And over there, I start driving a taxi. And in the weekend, some of those taxi drivers, after about 6 months that I'm driving, they're playing poker. So they invite me. And of course, I went to play because I knew a little poker before. I never played in the army like people thought I did, but right before the army in high school. And when I go play, they introduced me for the first time for stud and Omaha and all those pot limit because I thought, it's only one game. I mean, to make the long story short, every weekend I made a lot of money playing those guys. And of course, there wasn't a good players. And then I decided, I stayed there for about 2 years in Alaska. Every 2-3 months, I took a trip to Vegas. So making this money, flying to Vegas, they clean me out. I get in, I get to Stardust, and I go back with nothing. Then I realize I might be a good player over here with those players. But so my brother-in-law arrived to Alaska. A year later, he said, I'm done with, 6 month dark, 6 month light. And he flew to Vegas. And from Vegas, he was going to go to Disneyland. And then he called me. He said, listen, there's a film develop lab for sale. He didn't have to say it twice. I flew down. We bought this film developed in 30 minutes. And 6 months later, I left Alaska. I arrived over here. And the film's developed shop was right in front of Stardust. So every break I go to Stardust, I play every time. And I start falling in love with the game. Of course, I start like anybody else, 5-10, 10-20, 20-40, and playing only small limit game. And then later on, when we move from Stardust, I moved to the Mirage. I start playing some no-limit games and the mixed games. And only then I become, I just loved it so much. I still was in business, but I realized so much money that I make in business, I lose, to the poker player. And of course, I'm not a good reader in English, so I never read any book. But I did everything watching other people. I did everything learning from top players and the stories with Chip and Doyle and the story with this. Right there, when I start playing theirs, I already was a winner player. I start making money, and I remember the biggest question every fan asked me: "You playing your own money?" I mean, everyone thinking there's impossible that you bet $150,000 with nothing, or Sami Fahadu, this kind of bluff, or Daniel Cole with full house over quad for million, and some people don't believe it. And I love what Gabe Kaplan do on this show. He said, in a rerun of the show, he said, they playing their own money. He's saying it at the beginning of the show. And so that's how I've become poker player.